How's it going, everyone? We've been talking quite a bit about Granblue Fantasy Relink on this channel, at least leading up to its release. Coming out of its release, there's been a lot to cover over the last week in gaming with the release of Helldivers 2, as well as everything going on with Xbox and PlayStation. But circling back to Granblue Fantasy Relink, it's really done my heart joy to see all of the positive reception for the game seemingly doing very well from a commercial standpoint, and overall a new franchise doing really well over here stateside. I know Granblue's been around for a while, but in terms of a big budget JRPG here in the States and Europe and whatnot, it's the first big JRPG. We had Granblue Fantasy versus Rising, but in terms of a style of game like this, first one over here stateside, and JRPGs doing well and being received well. Always gonna be happy about that, especially a game that we've been covering on this channel for like 7 years. Yes, if you go back to videos from years ago, we were talking about the development of this game, and I was just hoping that one day it would come out, it would be good, and it would be received well, and it would do well from a sales standpoint so we could get more of it. And guess what? All of those things have happened, and first want to talk about the Granblue Fantasy Relink Twitter account, noting after just 11 days, Granblue Fantasy Relink has sold over 1 million copies worldwide. A million thanks to our wonderful community of Skyfarers for helping us reach the milestone. We have more updates on the horizon, so stay tuned. So obviously, we'll be covering that whenever updates drop, and this is a game that is going to be consistently updated with new content. We talked about the first few updates that they're going to have rolling out, at least the 10 updates, the major updates. You know, they're gonna do updates with bug fixes, patches, things like that, but in terms of content updates, you're gonna have a major quest, you're gonna have new characters being added, and then come May, there's also another update that they haven't clarified as far as what the content is gonna be, but there's gonna be new content in that update as well. Over 1 million copies, incredibly successful number. I know to a lot of you guys and a lot of people that are following sales numbers now, I feel like it's been a lot more popular to follow sales numbers ever since Palworld came out, and not just sales numbers and concurrent player Steam counts, because that's one of those metrics that you can really follow. Sales numbers is what it is, but as people have realized when it comes to these games that multiplayer is a big emphasis. In Granblue, you can play solo, and the main story is solo and everything like that. It's not necessarily as much multiplayer focused as some of these other recent releases like a Helldivers 2, but still wants a consistent player base for sure, especially when you talk about people beating the game and whatnot. But that is such a core element of these games that people have realized. I'm happy that people have picked up on it, that it's not just about day one sales numbers, it's about where are you weeks after release and where is your player base going to stabilize at, because stability in your player base and having a consistent and engaged user experience, that is so important. It is never going to be a case where the game's first, let's say, 72-hour peak is going to be maintained for a long term, but you'd like to keep as many of those players engaged for as long as you can, especially if you're doing a consistent streamline of updates. If you look at a Palworld, that game peaked at over 2 million players, and that game falls to as low as like 400,000, 450,000 players now, and some people are ready to call that game dead. Guys, that game is far from dead. 450,000 would be a very healthy number to stabilize at. 300,000 would be, 200,000 would be, 100,000 would be, 50,000 players would be very healthy to stabilize at. I just offer that to you guys for those of you that may have your perception a little bit skewed by some of the numbers. But Granblue Relink in its own right, back to this game, is doing very well, and over 1 million copies sold for a $60 game. That is incredible, especially with the franchise that doesn't have a ton of cachet outside of Japan, in the States, in Europe, so on and so forth. Again, Fantasy Versus and Versus Rising were a thing, but those games aren't that big, and they are fighting games, and this does cater to a different audience. Like, there's a ton of people that played Relink that have never played Granblue Fantasy Versus, and so on and so forth. I do want to note another thing. Speaking of Steam concurrent player counts, man, really surprised at Granblue Fantasy Relink. First of all, its all-time peak is a very healthy number, and its consistency in maintaining that peak, because its all-time peak was reached 9 days ago on February the 4th at 114,000 players. It cracking over 100,000, again, incredibly successful number. When you look at some of the recent game releases, and by the way, it's been absolutely hectic for new game releases. Some of the games with some big IPs attached to them, you had Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, you had Persona 3 Reload. Those games peaked at around 45,000 players, and you're talking about Granblue Fantasy Relink doubling up on that, well over doubling up on that. Really, it's just falling short of Palworld as well as Helldivers 2 for new releases this year, off the top of my head, as far as the biggest games released this year. I'm sure there were probably a couple of other titles on Steam that I'm forgetting about, but ones that stick out to me, Palworld and Helldivers 2, and those two games are pretty massive, so no shame in falling short of that. And even more impressive, and the number that you guys should actually follow, all-time peak was reached 9 days ago, 114,000 players. Well, guys, it has not fallen off that much. The peak in the last 24 hours was 108,000 players. That is incredible. I mean, 9 days isn't a lengthy period of time, but it's been over a week. The main story isn't that lengthy. I know the main story is seen as more of a setup for the endgame content, but man, it being over 100,000, that means people are staying engaged to the experience and still very much enjoying it, and hopefully, you know, it's not going to stay at over 100,000 forever, but as new content rolls out, you would hope that it's still going to stay well over 50,000, and if it stays well over 50,000, that is a very, very successful number. Ultimately, it'll fall below that as well when you're talking about 6 months, a year down the line, but who knows? Sometimes these things are a little bit unpredictable. This was also a full $60 game release that wasn't released on other e-tailers as far as the PC release goes. Like, you couldn't buy it at a Green Man Gaming at a discounted price or anything like that, and I do feel like games like Helldivers 2 and Palworld showcase that being priced at a more budget-friendly price, 40, 30 bucks, that is going to give you a leg up as far as your concurrent player base and getting people to pick up games based on word of mouth. At the end of the day, Granblue sold incredibly well, 1 million copies, and not every game is going to be a budget title at $30 to $40, and Granblue had a lengthy development cycle attached to it. It's a bigger budget game, I would have to imagine. That it being $60 isn't crazy at all, but, you know, it being $60 and still reaching over 100,000 concurrent players, I think that is a very, very successful number. On top of that, if you remember when Granblue Fantasy Relink initially came out, the Steam reception was, I believe, mixed, and then it got to mostly positive. Mixed is, you know, the 60% range, and mostly positive is 70 to 79%. Well, the Steam reception has totally improved for this game as well. 17,155 Steam user reviews right now, 89% of those reviews are positive. 89% is a really good number to be at as far as that's concerned as well. Doubt it'll hit overwhelmingly positive. I mean, it certainly could in due time if it continues to get positive reviews, but 89% is a very, very good number to be at, so good for Granblue Fantasy Relink on that end as well. The game, for a new RPG franchise over here stateside in Europe, in terms of, you know, a franchise that doesn't have a lot of cachet, doesn't have a long history attached to it, is doing very, very well. Are there issues with the game? Absolutely, and it certainly had some issues at launch with the PC version and things of that nature, but overall, really enjoying it. I think the gameplay is absolutely exhilarating. The story, I get it, it's kind of confusing to follow, especially where they drop you into. You're not going into this game for an absolute top-tier narrative. I think if you do go into it with that expectation, you are going to be left a little bit disappointed. The story's fine, it's serviceable, but it's not at the level of some of the most engrossing JRPG narratives of all time. I'm sure they could work their way up to that, and there's so much they could do in terms of narrative for Granblue going into the future, and it is going to be exciting to see how they're going to handle Granblue as an IP going forward in terms of, obviously, they're going to update this game for a while, but I would imagine that now that you have the foundation in place for the gameplay and whatnot for Granblue Fantasy Relink, ultimately, you do want to do a sequel. This game went through a lot of development turmoil, but it came out the other side as a really high-quality game. Why not continue to create really high-quality games, especially, again, when you have the foundational elements in place with Granblue Fantasy Relink, and they work pretty damn well, all things considered. So congrats on Granblue Fantasy, 1 million copies sold, and let me reiterate, 2024 has been an absolutely stellar year for game releases, and it's been absolutely packed, loaded with big titles. Persona, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, Granblue Fantasy Relink, Helldivers 2, Palworld, Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, Prince of Persia The Lost Crown, and outside of, I would say, POP The Lost Crown, I'm not too familiar with the commercial numbers on that, and it's not on Steam, so we can't even follow concurrent players, but outside of that game, every game has done killer numbers and has done really well for itself. Persona, Like a Dragon, and Granblue all cracked 1 million copies sold. Helldivers 2 and Palworld are doing incredibly well. And then Last of Us Part 2 Remaster, I mean, it was a $10 upgrade, and I'm sure that did fine as well. But it kind of goes to show that if games are of quality, no matter their release timing, everyone has room to eat, so to speak, in that the games will pop off. Now, I think it would be ideal for, you know, a Granblue and a Persona to not be released in the same week, but it's nice to see that both of those games have done fairly well, all things considered. But that'll do it for me. Granblue cracks 1 million copies sold. Reception is really strong right now. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comment section down below. Your experiences with the game thus far, what you'd like to see out of Granblue going into the future. Again, your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.